So hello. I'm happy to see you all today in our first panel discussion in 12th Polip Festival. My name is Ivana Bodrožić and I'm a writer from Croatia, and I will be moderating this panel discussion today. I'm also happy to say hello to my guests. First, I will introduce them shortly. Although I'm sure that if you had a little peek in Beton, you will find their biographies and pieces of their work. But just for those of you who maybe don't know who are they, I'm sorry in advance if I will misspell your names. I tried. I will do my best not to it. Mirishahe Syla. Okay, thank you. She's from Kosovo, so perhaps you know her better than the rest of us. She has a bachelor degree in political science from the University of Pristina, but she also has a degree from Women and Gender Studies from Iowa, USA. You can read her poetry in the Beton, and I'm very glad that you came today, because I think you are really a perfect guest for this panel. By my side we have Alida Bremer. She is originally from Croatia, but we can say German writer, because she's writing on German from '93, if I'm correct. And she is author of several, now 2 novels, right? And also translated to English. And Alida is maybe in a way a heart also of Polip Festival. She is here from the beginning, and she did a lot of work to support the festival in Pristina, so also very related to our topic today, and I'm glad that you are with us. And my third guest, Şebnem İşigüzel. Okay. She's a Turkish writer. She started to publish also in '93, if I'm correct, and wrote several novels, won several prizes also for her short stories, and Anis Gini will help us as translator to talk to you, so welcome and happy to be here. And please applaud for our guest today. So here is the panel discussion. The title is Life versus Literature, so it can mean a lot of things, but I will try to focus on maybe segment which is most related to feminism and other voices in the literature. It's not always important who is writing books, but it's also important who is hired in publishing house. It's something that we all know, and there is a big gap between writers and readers. As we know, in most of the countries, 70% of readers are women. But the most of authors that they are published, even today, are male authors, and just it's very important to say that in the publishing industry, the most of the editors and chief editors are still male authors. So there is one problem that we have, because diversity among the readers and diversity among the audience is quite huge, but it's not, this diversity is not followed by the books that they are published, especially in our region, especially in our countries. Maybe it's different from outside, maybe you can tell us something about that. But for the beginning, I will ask you, how are your experience with this topic in your own countries or among people you know? do you think that we have that problem? You know, who is telling the story and who is sharing the story? Because stories are around us, but not all the stories are published, and they are not reaching reading audience. So maybe you can start.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Actually, my point of view or my perspective would be not perhaps so much on who is publishing as the publishing houses, but more of who is telling stories. To start from there. So I think in general the history has shown us who actually tells stories, and then how we are built based on those stories, and how we think based on that, and then of course the business, let's call it like that, it's affected by this, so the publishing houses and all of that. The idea is that first of all, literature in itself as a language, as a form of communication among people, among cultures, among generations, and through times, it's a way of form of communication beyond just sharing information with each other. It's not science, that's what science does. But literature in itself, the way we think, the way we feel, it goes deeper than that and beyond the information itself. And it's about sharing our inner worlds with each other, and also through time. But then, who gets to be heard in this process and who gets to speak in this process is decided, unfortunately, by so many other processes, social structures, especially affected by gender identity, which is one of the biggest categorization of people, I would say, throughout time and cultures. So what happens in this process, and how this affects then what is published, is that this language of communication has been used mostly by those in power and those who has the power, and they have also maintained the power by using this means of communication. And those have been men, and women have been writing about this, but as you said, they have not been read. And sometimes when we say, okay, so this is happening, and apparently there are not so many stories from women, sometimes the problem is that we don't actually know them, because there are stories from women. However, great writers have been writing about this, and I have to mention and speak in the words of Virginia Woolf, because she has talked about this. And in her great work, Virginia mentions, especially in her essay, A Room of One's Own, mentions the importance of women not being silenced and women writing, but also she mentions how present men were throughout the history and in literature and science and the production of knowledge in general. So in her book, she describes the moment when she goes to the museum, British Museum, and there she is looking to find books, to find the truth. And as she says, and I will quote her here, she says, "If truth is not to be found on the shelves of the British Museum, where, I asked myself, is truth?" So she's looking for the truth in the museum, among the books. And what she finds there is books that are written by men, for women, not so many books by women, for men or for women. And she does this sort of research and she's taking notes, and then she finds herself that kind of truth that is presented in the museum in these titles that I will have to read. So in some of the titles that she has found, and as she says, men write about women, and a woman herself is the most discussed animal in the world. Because men feel the right to actually write about them, because men feel that they can understand them better, because the woman is the other. And men, by writing for them, actually maintain this position as the other, because they are the subject and she remains the object that can only function in relation to them. So some of the titles that she finds are "Weaker in moral sense than," "Always men writing about women. Idealism of greater consciousness of always of women. South Sea Islanders, age of puberty among girls there. Attractiveness of offer the sacrifice to small size of brain of women. Of course, profounder subconsciousness of less hair on the body of, which is one of the truths she finds there, and she says that's all I could understand about women. They have less hair in their bodies than men, and this is what man wants us to know. Love of children, of greater length of life, of weaker muscles, of strength of affection, of vanity, of higher education, of Shakespeare's opinion, of Dr. Johnson's opinion, of Mr. Oscar Browning's opinion, of so all these men's opinions of, and then she cites some of the men and what do they think. And then she says, Dr. Johnson, for example, thought that actually men thought that women were incapable, but Dr. Johnson thought the opposite. And then what he said was that actually we are aware that they are very much capable, but what we do is that we find the weakest among them, so then we can continue building up ourselves in their weaknesses so that we can feel great. Otherwise, if there wouldn't be a weaker woman, how else would we feel great about ourselves? So we build ourselves based on that. And that's what she finds there. She finds a history and a whole, a place where you are supposed to actually produce and get knowledge. This is where women are. And this is her. This is how she faces that sort of truth. But then you have other women in history who have also raised their voices, perhaps not through literature, but in other ways, about how unheard they are and how unknown they are. Then you have this famous speech, "Ain't I a Woman?" From Sojourner Truth, who does exactly this. She is asking, isn't she a woman that is actually portrayed by the feminist movement itself actually in that time. So they talk about this sort of woman, this concrete identity of a woman, what is a woman, who is a woman, not talking about all of the women. So she is there and asking, and I a woman? So she is asking all of us, even these days, to reconsider and rethink what being a woman means. And how we can understand what being a woman means if we do not produce what we feel and who we are to ourselves through literature, which is that communication that goes beyond just sharing information. So, going beyond this, first of all, accepting or recognizing our feelings, our emotions, accepting them as normal, because the biggest fight throughout history has been actually to not allow women to feel emotions. Women were witch hunted because of their emotions and what they did with them. Women were called crazy, hysteric, and all of that by scientists because they felt emotions. Women were always told what kind of emotions they can feel and what do those emotions mean to men most of the time, not to women themselves, because they weren't allowed to express them. So being able to first of all recognize them as a normal part of our being, then make them public, then write about them, then being able to accept them as something normal and recognizable from the readers as well, is a whole process that has to take place in order then perhaps for the business to change as well.
Yes.
But as I said, I have not so much information on how it works with publishing houses and all of that, but I might know why that can happen. It's because there is a long history of who has been writing for whom and who has been allowed to feel and to show those feelings and how we understand those feelings. So yeah, this would be perhaps my introduction.
Thank you for this great contribution. Yes, great. And regarding your story and Virginia's story about your museum, it's not so much different today when we go to For example, Tate Museum, there is a statistic that around 10% is maybe female authors presenting as artists, but around 90% when we are talking about acts are female. So there are 90% as naked bodies, but only 10% as artists who are representing their work. So it's not much different. We can see it also today. So
I will just have to add something.
yes. Okay.
So recently I read somewhere they were asking why Jane Austen is still so relevant today, and then they were saying because the things they were writing at that time are still so relevant today, and perhaps have changed. The industry have changed, but the same ideas are still there. The numbers show that actually.
Yes.
So yeah, that's
okay. Not good news. Okay, thank you, Mirishahe. So Alida, I will ask you slightly same question, but maybe a little bit different also to expand. You have this double experience living in Croatia and then living in Germany. So maybe you can tell us, is there any difference? Is there any good news maybe in Germany regarding female literature and, as Mirishahe said, recognizing as equal, not like women writing, which is always something under the real writing. So we have real writing and real writers, and then we have female voices. So I think when we have female voices, we are still in really bad position. And the second thing, is it in German the same? I must say from the Croatian experience, all most appreciated book awards are holding the names of the great male writers. So we have Ivo Andrić, Miroslav Krleža, Fritz, Meša Selimović, Vladimir Nazor, but we only have one poetry award, which is Vesna Paron, and it's not that appreciated as those that I said before. So, of course, women are not getting those prizes in the same dynamic as they are writing, where equality, but I must say also 90% of the book awards are held by names of the male writers. So maybe you can tell us about your experience a little bit.
Yeah, to start with bad news.
Okay.
Germany is really very, very similar to Croatia, or Croatia is a small country similar to this huge country, Germany. Germany is not much more better. And it was really funny because in playing to come here, I read again and again Virginia Woolf's essay. Not per case, but I have to write for one anthology a text till end of May, and text is about women authors 50 plus. I'm 60 plus, so I'm age and woman. I have two disadvantages in my life, and this anthology is about these two problems, because women and young, okay, somehow in today's publishing industry, but women and old, okay, nothing. It's not good. So I was reading it because of this essay I have to write now, and it was this moment because you were talking about Virginia Woolf. We are always go back to Virginia Woolf. We have to. If we start to write an essay about like I now have to do for this anthology, oh okay. Go back to basics. So take Virginia Woolf. And I was reading it in the plane, and I remembered now, during your speech, that it was for 10 years or something in a huge feuilleton in Germany, Die Zeit, very, very important journal, a guy who wrote 100 most important literary persons of the world, and there were two women. And I don't believe it wasn't, Virginia Woolf was not there. So there were, this was terrible, there was hundreds of titles and so, everything for men. And I thought in that moment, it's not possible that this guy and those guys don't understand that for us, and we are half of mankind, the most important author is Virginia Woolf. So it is our, and Simone de Beauvoir and some others, but the most important really, and Miss Dalloway, for example, is one of the best novels of the 20th century, definitely, and it's the best novel about the First World War. But it's not recognized as such. That is about the German feuilleton and critics. And then I make comparison with French and with British lists of the best authors, and only in the Great Britain. The first one is, I think, Middlemarch novel is on the first place, and there are 10 women authors as the most important of all time, only in English-speaking world. In French-speaking world, I think there were among 10, 3, and in German-speaking world among 10, 0. So Germany is much more near to us, to Middle Europe, to Croatia, to our world, than British and English-speaking world. There are differences. And now about Germany, yes, in the last 20 years, it's of course, there are much more women in the published, of course. It's not like 50 years ago there were only men, I think. But now there are much more. But it's important to see who is literary critic, who is in journals, and who is also on universities. That's the question of Virginia Woolf, because she started her essay with university. And this Oxbridge, and on universities, the students of philologies, of German or Romanistic or Slavistic or all these philologies are mostly every student is female. So there are 90% or 95% are female, but professors are men, and assistants and docents are men. So we have now a law in Germany that they have to fill the quote with female professors, and that is somehow a little bit better. After this really per law decision, you have to, if you have 2 candidates and one is female, you have to take female. That is the law now on universities, and that is a little bit better. And you have to have these quote regulations on the law. Parliament has to have such laws, because you will not break this problem. So similar like in Croatia, now female authors publish and write, and there are also read from another female readers, and so. But on the establishment, and that is university and editors and journals and critics, you have much more male voices than female. And about prizes, yes, the most important prizes are, of course, males, Georg Büchner Prize, Heinrich Heine, Goethe, of course, Schiller Prize. The most important are men names. And there is also movement, like in Croatia, some activists, they made now new prizes. In my city of Münster, there is Annette von Droste-Hülshoff, an important person, and now there is this prize. But it is now prize only for female authors.
It's like consolation prize.
Yes, but it is of course stupid. You have to give it also to male authors if they are, I don't know.
There is this situation with Orange Prize. It's something that is really respectable, and it's something that changed. But there were in Croatia some of our colleagues telling that we should have every prize like now, for example, Fritz, T-Portal or something, and every year to give one prize to male authors and to female authors. For my opinion, it was very humiliating, because what is this? It's like some really consolation prize. We are awarding real literature, but then not to be insulted, we will award even you with one prize. So yeah.
Yeah, but it is interesting. You told it on the beginning. You said it at the beginning. There are more than 70% readers are female. So yes. It's really not clear how the publishing industry also don't take them seriously. And these readers take them personally also not seriously, themselves. Because they have to make a rebellion. They are readers, and they can tell the prizes for their most loving author, they have to be given to them.
Yes, but I think that most of readers, or some of readers, are constructed by those narratives that they are reading. Maybe some of you heard this great speech of Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, Danger of a Single Story, when she is telling that you are willing to read and you love books and you love art, but you cannot find yourself in it. And in a way, little by little, you've been constructed by those narratives, and it's really hard to rebel and to get out of it. So it's much more deeper problem, as you said. Yeah.
Yes, I think in Germany there is such idea, yes, the female, but also people of color, migrants, all these people, also old people like me, and so they can write their personal problems, describe them, and then they will be there, or I don't know, you were abused as a child, and then you write about it, your personal trauma, and then you there is some kind of literature for your personal problems. And the women are part of it, you know.
Part of personal problems, yes.
And it's not really, it's not always like this, and there are some, of course, there are some serious ideas that women also write good literature, but it is somehow very often only a part of all these identities. And identities now can express them and have to express them, and now, okay, do it, so express you. But literature is not this, you know.
Yes.
And now we have a really problem, because it's, I don't know, 80% of our new books in Germany are about these personal statements, personal problems. And 2 weeks ago, Joshua Cohen in the United States won a Pulitzer Prize for his novel, The Netanyahus. I read it. It's fantastic. It's funny and about an actual president in Israel, but not about him, but about some anecdotes from his childhood. But really funny. And very ironical, very postmodern, totally different than everything what is now written about identities and about these problems, you know. I'm a young woman and I was abused as a child or something like this. No, it's a novel in the style of Pynchon, of Roland, of some of these Carver, some of these great authors from American literature. And then Joshua Cohen gave interview, because he's now a star of American literature, and he told, yes, today it's so, everybody is speaking in the first person, but for me the great novel, and then of course he gave some names, great novel, Tolstoy, I don't know who he named, Tolstoy and Hemingway and somebody. The great novel is to be capable to speak in the third person, and you can speak like a table and like a dish, like a chair, and like a woman and like a man, and so in the third person. And my last novel was also like this, in the third person. You know, everybody, somebody is telling the story, and you don't know which gender is this somebody, and then. But that is not appreciated at all in the European literature, not at all. And if a woman is writing like this, definitely not. You have to speak in the, and my novel is somehow very political and very historical, but somehow like a male person wrote. Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
And so Joshua Cohen is allowed to tell it, but I don't believe that one woman can take this position.
Yes. So now we'll see how it is in Turkey. Şebnem. So maybe you can share with us a little bit your experience about this gap between female authors and the readers, and how is the position of female authors in Turkey in general. I happen to know this Turkish writer, her name is Şebnem. She lives in Zagreb, and she is a writer and political commentator. So I've heard, as I know from her, that it's not easy, but you are living there in Istanbul, and how is your experience as a female writer and a writer, of course?
Hello. Önce dünyadan bakmak istiyorum.
First, I want to look at it from world's perspective.
Dün akşam bir cümle söylendi.
Yesterday a word was mentioned.
Liberite, egalite.
Liberté, égalité.
Benim roman kahramanım da aynı şeyi söyler.
The hero of my novel also mentions the same thing.
Ama şöyle der.
But he or she says it like this. She, I believe.
Liberite, egalite, Beyoncé.
She says it, liberté, égalité, Beyoncé.
Bunu neden anlattım?
Why did I mention this?
Aslında edebiyat ortak bir dil.
In fact, literature is a common language.
Beyoncé Amerika'nın güzel, güçlü kadını.
Beyoncé is the strong female of America.
Ve benim roman kahramanım İstanbul'un bir çocuğu.
And the hero of my novel is a child from Istanbul.
Ve benim roman kahramanım belki biraz Amerika'nın nikel çocukları gibi, Nickel Boys.
And she's kind of like the Nickel Boys of USA.
Şunu demek istiyorum. Aslında edebiyat içinde hepimiz eşitiz ve ortak bir dildeyiz.
In fact, what I'm trying to say is, within literature, all of us are the same and we share the same language.
Ama endüstri bizi bölmek istiyor ve bizden farklı talepleri var. Kadın olmak, Türk olmak. Bunu yazsan okurum.
But the industry is trying to divide us by being Turkish, being a female, and stating things like, if you write for this, then I will be reading you.
Benim ülkemde durum nasıl?
What is the situation in my country?
Şaşırtıcı çünkü benim ülkemin ağır demokratik sorunları var.
It is weird because in my country there are deep democratic issues.
Ama bununla çok bağlantısız, çok özgür bir ülkeye sahip, özgür bir ülkeymiş gibi yüksek bir edebiyatı var.
But independent of that, there is a high level of literature as if belonging to a very free, very liberal country.
Bunu anlamak çok zor.
It is kind of difficult to understand this.
Orhan Pamuk roman kahramanına şöyle söylettirir.
Orhan Pamuk makes his novel hero to say this.
Kimse bizi uzaktan bakarak anlayamaz.
No one can understand us by looking from far away.
Benim ülkemde kadın edebiyatçılar çok güçlü bir edebiyat üretiyorlar bütün baskılara rağmen.
In my country, the female writers are producing great literature despite all the oppression.
Ama bu edebiyat dünyanın gelişmiş ülkelerine gittiğinde bazı taleplerle karşılaşıyor.
But when this literature goes to world's more developed countries, it faces some demands.
Ben dünyada iyi edebiyat üreten yayın evlerinden çıkıyorum.
I'm coming out of the publishing houses that produce good literature around the world.
Buna rağmen benim Ağaçtaki Kızım için bir editör şunu yazmıştı. Acaba bu ağır demokratik sorunlar burada anlaşılabilecek mi?
And despite this, editor from had written this about my Girl in the Tree novel. Will the democratic issues be understood by this novel?
Oysa bir Amerika'dan bir romanı yayınlamışlardı ve bir Meksika sınırı hikayesiydi.
While they had published a novel from USA and it was a story regarding something happening in the Mexican border.
Bu tezat şundan kaynaklanıyor. Benden bekledikleri farklı.
This contradiction happens because what they expect from me is something different.
O yine kibarca bunu örtülü dillendirilmişti. Bazen bu çok açık dillendiriliyor. Kadın ve farklı bir dinden olup başka türlü yazmak.
he had mentioned this in a very covered, very polite way. Sometimes it is more direct when it's mentioned, but he was trying to say you are or tam olarak nasıl söylediniz tekrar? Kadın olmak.
Kadın başka bir din.
Teşekkürler. Because you are from a female from a different religion, you are supposed to be writing in a certain way.
Bunun için de şunu söyleyebilirim. Benim ailem aslında bu topraklardan geliyor, Arnavut kökenli.
And regarding this, I can mention this. My family actually comes from this soil. I do have Albanian origins.
1894'te gelmiş.
They have come to Turkey, that is, in 1894.
Ve babamın babası İstanbul Boğazı'nın ortasında bir sandalda doğmuş.
And the father of my father was born in a boat between in the middle of a sea in Istanbul.
Ama bir hilkat garibesi değilmiş.
But he was not a freak.
Doğu ve Batı arasında olmak bir hilkat garibesi yaratmıyor.
Being between West and the East does not automatically create a freak.
Bu yüzden Türkiye'de kadınlarla ilgili ciddi sorunlar var. Kadınlar öldürülüyor ve katiller ceza almıyor.
And regarding this, in Turkey there are very serious issues. The women are being killed and the killers are not being persecuted or punished.
Ama buna rağmen çok güçlü bir feminist kuşak var ve biz kadın yazarlar varız.
But despite of this, there is a very strong feminist generation and there are us female writers.
Ve gücümüz romanlarımız, yazılarımız.
And our power is our novels, our writings.
Yani ülkemin içinde bulunduğu durumla uyuşmayan bir gücü var kadın edebiyatın.
The female literature, the women's literature has a improper power compared to the position of women within my country.
Aksine benim orada ürettiğim o edebiyat dünyaya çıktığında zorluklarla karşılaşıyor.
In contrast, the literature that I produce there has difficulties when it goes abroad.
Ve bir küçük örnek daha vermek istiyorum.
And I want to give a small example as well.
Türkiye'deki yayıncılığın ve edebiyatın ne kadar canlı olduğuna dair.
To mention how alive and how lively the literature and the publishing in Turkey is.
Bu yıl Nobel ödülü alan Abdullah Gumrah Nobel ödülü aldığında ben Berlin'deydim.
When the Nobel Prize winner Abdullah Gumrah won his award this year, I was in Berlin.
Almanca'da ikimizi de aynı yayın evi yayınlıyor.
In German language, the same publishing house publishes both of us.
Ve Abdullah Gumrah'ın hiçbir kitabı yoktu, tükenmiş ve tekrar basılmamış.
And there were no books of Abdullah Gumrah. All of them had been sold out and they weren't new publishments.
Oysa Türkiye'de de yayıncımız aynı.
Well, in fact, our publisher in Turkey is the same as well.
Bütün romanları vardı ve bütün kitapçılardaydı.
And there were all of his novels and they were in every library.
Almanya en büyük ekonomi.
The Germany is the biggest economy.
Ve Türkiye şu an büyük bir ekonomik buhran içinde.
While Turkey is in a great economic chaos at the moment.
İşte kadınlarla ilgili durumda böyle ilginç tezatlıklar barındırıyor.
And the situation of women includes many such contradictions.
Ben kadınları anlatmayı seviyorum, feminizmden güç alıyorum ve ülkemde de bütün kadın romancılar bu yönde çok güçlü bir edebiyat üretiyorlar.
I love to tell about women, to describe women, and I get my power from feminism, and many of the writers in my country do so.
Sadece dünyanın ön yargısından rahatsızım.
The only thing that bothers me is the prejudices of the other parts of the world.
Ve tabii daha iyi bir iklimde yaşamak isterdim, demokratik iklimde.
And of course, I would have preferred to write under a different, a better democratic climate.
Thank you. Thank you. It's definitely something that we are, I think, all facing with because in our case, when was war in Croatia, and writers, including me in my first novel, when we wrote about war, it was something that was hot. It was something that people wanted to read, and they had a prejudice. For example, if you are a writer from Turkey, someone abroad is expecting to get a certain story. And if you are from Kosovo or from Croatia, and then you are writing about gender issues, about marriage issue, about the relationship between mother and daughter, it's definitely something that is not that interesting. I think that French writers or American writers has much more right to do it. So I think that's definitely one prejudice that we are all facing. But just one question I wanted to ask you, all of you in this second row, regarding this topic with prejudice. There is also topics in literature. So what is considering to be valuable enough to write about? For example, there are big topics that it's not only the way that some novel is written, which is giving it a certain value, it's also the topic that we are choosing. So I think there is secondary topics, and it's also related with the female voices or voices of the other. Of course, giving birth, relationship between mother and daughter. I don't know, a lot of the things that we had experienced through our lives, it's not something that it's considering to be valuable enough as a literary topic. So what can we do about it, or if we can do anything about it? But we definitely need to point that and to discuss about that, because when the big things are happening, and there is also one position of the power, not only one place, of course, it's all the chain of things that are happening, but they're arbitrating about what is good enough to be a great topic for a literature, and what is just your problems, your private female problems that you have, and they're not good enough to be a great topic. So maybe you can, yes, please.
So this takes us to the big question, whose stories are told, and I have to go back to Virginia Woolf again.
Okay.
But there she talks about the dinner where men are eating, and then she says, so men there write love poems or anything else, but no one is writing what they're eating. Mm-hmm. And no one knows.
Who made that?
Yes.
Yes.
And they do not know how important that is, because they don't even have to think about it. So who has to think about something, and what they don't have to think about tells a lot, how they see the world and how they position themselves within it. And then Virginia, what she does, she tells what they're eating, all in details, because not everyone has access even to that kind of food. And those who have access to that kind of food tells a lot how much power, social, political and economic power they have. So it's in these details where you find the truth, more than in the library and in the books. So whose stories are told? I think it's important that what you also mentioned, if we write in third or first person, and how we write, and how personal do we want to get, let's say. But sometimes we are so used to read what others write about us and how others perceive world and how they present it actually, that I myself personally started thinking that this is the way how I should think, how I should, how to say, understand the world, but also transmit it. And then I read Audre Lorde, and she talks about the personal and how important that is, and how important it is to dig deeper in yourself, find it, and make it public. And how personal is very political, and this is what feminism teaches us, I think, the best, how political is, personal is. So once you understand this, once you get to this point where you understand that your personal is not just something that happens to you and it should be yours and it's not worthy of sharing, because this is how stories are built and told, and this is how we communicate through literature, by our personal. And then Audre Lorde says, no, that's not how it is. Your personal is very, very political, and it should be written about, and it should be public and shared. So this is when I guess we start to understand that our stories as well matter. But maybe writing in the third person sometimes is also sort of telling you that you have some sort of power, because you have to be empowered to speak for someone else or as someone else. And sometimes because we are so much taught not to read about our personal, our stories, sometimes we don't feel that we are capable or we have the power to write in third person. And if you are able to write in first person, to at least be able to write about that, sometimes this is enough. You know, this is the first step, and if you're able to do that, that's enough. And maybe after that we are able to also start thinking about the power of writing in the third person. But I remember last year, I think, or 2 years ago, there was a discussion in Mitrovica actually about Serbian and Albanian writers there. And we were discussing their poems from both sides, let's say. And there were female writers from Serbian community and only male writers from Albanian community. And then you could see the difference. So when male writers were writing poetry about women, of course, they were writing about women as their lovers, as their mothers, as their sisters. How do they see them in the streets? How do they perceive them? Women's beauty and all of that. And then there was only one poem from a female Serbian writer, and she was writing how she feels at night all alone and how she cannot find herself in the streets of her city even when it's full of people. And she was telling how actually abandoned and how alone she feels as a writer. And she was digging so deep into her emotions and into her, how she positioned herself in the society, and how dark it was there actually. And it was completely different perspective, of course, and it was very personal, and it wasn't her writing in third person, it was her writing about herself. But I think we have detached from this because men have been writing so much about us. So it's kind of a revolution not to do that anymore, to just be able to write about ourselves, to tell our stories. And I think the way how we perceive things, what we see in a story, which side of the story we see. When we write about war, we write about killings, we write about power, we write about all of that. But as you mentioned, we don't write what happens in between, who is cooking in between, who is giving birth, how they are giving birth, what is happening with them, and all of that. We do not see those stories. And us, ourselves, women, think that those stories don't matter because we don't see them in the public, and we think that the public belongs to something bigger, something stronger, something more heroic than giving birth.
So profound, you know.
Yes.
It's not.
So the big topics. But the big topic is also what we are eating.
So it's a fun fact I must mention. A few weeks ago I saw an article in newspaper. It's about Reader's Digest. They pointed 10 most large and horrified pains that a human being can feel, and it was like migraine, it was a stone in the kidney, but giving birth wasn't there. So it was very funny because when it went out, then some of the readers said, okay, it's just, you know, something that it's affecting only half of the humanity, you know.
Like all of us, because we are born.
Yes, and all of us we are born, but none of in this, you know, scale of 10 most pain wasn't the giving birth. So it's something that it's saying exactly this is fun fact, and this is, you know, like banality, but it's definitely showing how, you know, one type of the pain and one type, not of the pain, but of the human experience is just not relevant as something that we are all expressing because we are not men, and why should we, you know, even consider that as pain? So
I think very important keyword, it's relevant, because you also mentioned what is relevant to others then. Sometimes we write from our own context and our perspective, what we know best, but then it's not relevant to others because others might expect us to write about something. As a women, they expect us to write about women's issues.
yes,
And they are recognized as such, as women's issues, not as humans' issues, because we are the other, as Simone has said. So, but to connect with this, how invisible, in the book Invisible Women, I think it's a book full of data on how invisible women in science are and how the pain is unrecognized. And here maybe we can draw a connection between literature and science, and how they influence each other actually. Because science also studies those that are perceived, let's say, as the norm, as the subject. And in most of the studies in the book, as it is told, let's take one example, for heart attack, for example. Most of the subjects of study are male bodies, and for other diseases as well. And not only humans, it's male for animals as well. So most of the rats are also male. So they study and they understand the biology and anatomy of a male, and then what they study, it is actually interpreted in those terms. So when they talk about heart attack, it was 80 or 90% of study, subject of study, it was male bodies. So they study how that happens, the symptoms and everything. And then what we see in the movies and in the media is usually typical symptoms of a male heart attack. But that doesn't happen the same to women, to female bodies. So sometimes even female women will not know that they are experiencing heart attack because they do not know their own symptoms, because what they see in the media is different, because what they read most of the time is different, because doctors do not know, because the knowledge is being produced based on male bodies. So students do not actually learn that in school, do not study that part. So it's a whole system that doesn't recognize that kind of experience, that heart attack that women. And the worst is that we ourselves do not recognize it as such as we do in the literature. We do not recognize our own experiences in literature because we were told otherwise. So it's the same with science then. And then you have so many other examples in the book that shows how invisible women's bodies are in science. Because we do not study them, because we do not understand them, and then we ourselves do not understand ourselves. So if we do not understand ourselves in this level, imagine what happens in literature, where we already know how it is.
Reflection.
Yes, so biologically unrecognized from science and from ourselves for ourselves. Sometimes we do not know what happened when we have, let's say, period pain. We go to doctor, and most of the time, even when you have completely different symptoms, it's in the book and it's in my personal experience. They will tell you this is period pain, and then you tell them no, this is not, because I do not recognize my body and what kind of pains I feel. But doctors, they do not know that because they do not study that. And we do not recognize ourselves and know ourselves in this biological level, then not in social level because of the social structures we live in and grow up, and then not also in literature level, where it's supposed to be something that comes from, as you all mentioned, from what we feel, not who we are or anything, but just what we are in a sense. So we remain the unrecognizable.
It's definitely life versus
exactly.
Yes, thank you. So Alida, the same question for you.
I'm not happy with identities in the arts at all. Also in this new development that every identity is expressing herself, himself, itself, is a problem. Because of this, what you told us, then there are expectations. What is a Turkish women writer to tell us in Germany? What is a black Jewish woman to tell us in, I don't know, America? And these expectations are filled with victim feelings. If you are always express you as identity, also as a woman, you are always in this complaining, because of your problems. You complain about your position as identity. I'm totally against it. Because if we go this way as female authors, it will be always men who play with styles and possibilities and have freedom to do everything with literature and arts, and we stay in those somehow cages that we built for us to speak about birth and our pain and something. We have to make it like men. We have to build it in complex artistic works, and not always in this first person who is telling the bad story about my life. I don't like this position for me. So that is the reason also I wrote my last novel in the men way, and it was all immediately recognized. A publisher from Munich told me, that is totally man book, and the men readers would love it, but you have to take pseudonym. You have to write, I don't know, Albert Bremer, and not Alida Bremer, and then they will take it in a bookshop, because they will recognize it as a book. It is the female name of the author, and they will not buy it. It is totally man book that you wrote, she told me. And it is a somehow man book that I wrote. But I see it not like this. It is not only not in this mainstream today that female authors fill with their own stories. Because you can take a person, of course, a protagonist in your novel, and she is a female, and you can put her all these problems, but then another person is a male person, and you can, for this protagonist, take male problems that you see as a woman. You are, of course, capable to recognize better than men, maybe, because you have sons like me. So I know very good men problems through my sons, and I can describe them in my protagonists. I'm not obliged to fill this position of a woman.
Yes, of course, but I just must say something.
Yes.
I must say that I disagree with this position that we then we are going from the point that what males are writing this is good, this is the best, and that we can achieve.
Very good. There are some very
yes,
good.
but there are some very, very bad. And
yes,
this is not the only position. So I don't like this position to play, to be like a man and then to be appreciated by men. I don't.
It's not like men, but it's not like men. That's what I'm totally disagree.
This is not
disagree.
Something that it's worth.
Because
of itself.
No, I totally disagree. That is the reason for it, that we think it is male. It is we don't recognize our own history. Agatha Christie is one of the most authors of all times. She made history. She wrote thousands of pages. She made history in genre. In this genre, that is the most read genre on the world. Today too, not only her books, but crime novels are the most read books at all. And this lady, we take her not as part of our female history. Why? It is not only Virginia Woolf there, it's also Agatha Christie there. Mary Shelley with Frankenstein. She was a really great author. Yes. We have poets, we have writers in the female tradition. They make really fantastic books, and I don't call them man literature. It's not, Agatha Christie novels are not man literature, it's literature. It's literature, and she is great in it. She is one of the best. So it is, till today, she is one of the best. But we don't recognize her. We take only this, yes, Virginia Woolf. She didn't write only essay like this, fantastic essay. It is excellent example of the brilliant form of essay. Not only the issue that she is describing, but also how I write an essay. But she also wrote, Mrs. Dalloway, and it is, of course, a novel in the manner like it's not female, it's not male. It's only a good novel, very good novel. The most important protagonist is Mrs. Dalloway, is a woman, but all other persons are, of course, men and women in this novel, and it's really great, and it's in the third person. So I'm against it. It is not only male arts. We have no many women in the history of arts and of literature because of social problems. But we have some of them, and we have to take them very seriously, and we have to reread them, and they are not recognized. There are some of them are totally lost. In Germany is really tragical because the national socialism killed everything in this history. There was a lady, Clara Ratzka, very feministic, very good in writing. She was similar like Thomas Mann in her, but nobody remembers her today. She wrote a family novel similar like Buddenbrooks, but before Thomas Mann wrote Buddenbrooks, but she is forgotten. And very many female authors in Croatia, my own aunt, I'm very proud of her, she is a cousin of my father, Mirjana Matić-Hale, great author. Matica Hrvatska made all of her books new, but nobody read her. I wrote, because she was my aunt, wrote something to her 100th birthday, but nobody read her, and she is really great.
Why do you think nobody read her?
Because she's not popular, because nobody speaks about her, because in Croatian histories of literature, she has two lines and not a whole page. So that is the art how professors and how historians and how journalists are doing with this issue, that there are female authors, they were somehow better than men in some genres or in theater and so, but they are taken like, okay, that's a children's literature or trivial literature or crime or something like that, or science fiction, Frankenstein is science fiction or so, but it's not so important. That's of course not true. Parts of literary history, and if we make this like everything was men wrote is now not good, and we make our new history, we will not do it on proper way.
But I don't agree with you. Shouldn't do that. But it's such a long history. You know, women are writing for the last 150 years maybe, and it's a whole history behind that was, you know, constructed in a way that there is one narrative and one system that we are living in. I don't like that system. And the rules of writing are, you know, built for that system. So I think that we shouldn't have these boundaries, and, you know, that we shouldn't on purpose model ourselves to fit in this male narrative, and then feel that we achieved something if male readers are reading and, you know, accomplish us.
I don't think every crime writer of today try to achieve something what Agatha Christie did. There are
it's only one Agatha Christie.
No, it's not only one.
No, but it's how many women write crime novels in last 150 years?
Very many. It was very.
But in you know in proportion with the male authors, it's in you know prominence.
No, it's not true. In crime novel, there are really most important voices still today. It's really very female genre. But if the females don't recognize what is their strong thing, like children's literature, very important. Some poetry forms, crime novels, some trivial forms, science fiction, very feministic also. There are some ways that very feministic in science fiction, and if we don't see it and we try only to be in this identity form, I don't think it's possible to.
Yes. You want to say, and then I would like to hear. Yes, but please.
Just want to add quickly. I don't think, to me personally at least, it's about the identities or who is actually writing. As you mentioned very beautifully, it's not if a woman or a man is writing or a male or female writer, but whose stories are being told. And since you mentioned children's literature, of course grown-up write children's book, and it doesn't mean they shouldn't, because they are not children, but they are telling children's stories. And when men write about women, and of course they can, this is what we do in literature, of course men can write about women, but the way men tell stories about women, it's not the same as women tell about themselves, stories about themselves. But then the way men write stories about women, it's still more acceptable than the way women tell stories about ourselves, which is not recognized publicly, even by us ourselves, as you said. and not accepted and not read. And this is, I think, the problem. Not if it's a female writer or a male writer, but whose stories are told and how are they're told. And maybe this is where is this. I was also kind of skeptic on this, if we should write from a man's perspective, because if, let's say, crime is written mostly by men, let's say, then what? I mean, we have other stories as well to tell. That doesn't mean that that's the best thing we can do. So, I don't know. I don't think it's about identities. It's just about whose stories are told by whom, and when it is accepted, actually, to tell the story and to see it as worth it. This is maybe the issue for me.
Thank you. So I would like to ask once more Şebnem to relate maybe with these topics. What are the topics now in Turkish literature that they are considering as something that is in the trend, because it's always something, we can call it like maybe generation topic or generation poetic. Is there something now in Turkey which is recognized as something that younger or middle generation is writing about?
Yine önce bu dünyadaki tartışma ile ilgili iki küçük şey söyleyeceğim.
First, I wanted to add a couple of things regarding this worldwide discussion.
Nabokov edebiyat derslerinde Jane Austen'ı çok iyi anlatır.
Nabokov, in his literature lectures, explains Jane Austen very greatly.
Aynı Nabokov aynı kitapta Dostoyevski'ye kötü eleştiriler yapar.
The same Nabokov does bad criticism, criticizes Dostoevsky in the same book.
Ama Jane Austen'a zekasını belirtir, yüksek edebi zekasını.
But he mentions the high literature intelligence of Jane Austen.
Jane Austen'ın Dostoyevski, Tolstoy seviyesinde görülmesinin tek eleştirisi budur.
The only criticism for Jane Austen to be on the same level of Tolstoy and Dostoevsky is this, actually.
Yoksa bütün erkek eleştirmenler onu odasına kapanmış zavallı bir kadın olarak tanımlar.
Because otherwise all the male critics describe her as a desperate female who has locked herself in her room.
Çünkü kadındır.
Because she is a woman.
İkinci örnek,
The second example.
Harry Potter'ın yazarı isminden bir harfi gizler.
The writer of the Harry Potter books hides one of the letters of her name.
Bu yayıncısının isteğidir.
This was the request of her publisher.
Çünkü böylece ismi bir erkek ismine aitmiş gibi görünür.
Because like this, her name appears to be a name of a male person.
Harry Potter'ı bir erkek yazar yazmış olursa daha çok okunur ve ilgi çeker.
If Harry Potter is written by a male writer, it will attract more attention and be read more.
Ama bu kitabı bir kadın yazmış olarak piyasaya çıkarsa herkes ön yargıyla yaklaşır.
But if it was published initially, that is, as a book by a female writer, it would have had more prejudices towards the book.
Bu büyük bir sorun. Şimdi buradan kendi ülkeme geleceğim.
This is a major problem, and from this point, I would like to go towards my country.
Ben hiç benden bekleneni yazmadım.
I have never written what was expected from me.
Hatta bazı erkekleri öyle kızdırdım ki bu kadın nasıl anne oldu ve kadın nasıl bir kadın dediler.
In fact, I got many men that angry that they were saying, how can this woman even, how did this woman even become a mother, or how can she become a writer?
Oysa yazarlığım benim yaratıcılığımla ilgili, insanlığımla ilgili.
In fact, my writing is only in relation with my creativity and with my humanity.
Annelik de sadece bir sabır ve sevgiyle ilgili.
And the motherhood only has to do with patience and sabır ve ne dediniz ikincisi?
Sevgi.
With patience and love. I apologize.
Bir erkek yazarda bu ayrımlar yapılmıyor.
For male writers, there are no such discriminations.
Baba olabilir ve aykırı şeyler yazabilir.
He can be a father and write about rebellion.
Ve o hep iyidir.
And he is always a nice person, he is always right.
Ben hiç tabulara dokunmaktan korkmadım.
I never feared touching the taboos.
Buna rağmen bu övülürken bile bir erkek gibi korkusuz dedim.
And despite of this, whenever I was praised for this, I was actually told she is fearless like a man.
Son romanım tarihi bir roman.
My final novel is a historic novel.
Ve bu milliyetçi Türk erkeklerini çok kızdırdı.
And it angered a lot the nationalist men in Turkey.
Çünkü Osmanlı'da bir kadının bir kış boyunca hükümdarlık yaptığını iddia ediyor roman.
Because the novel claims that female during the Ottoman period was doing leadership during a winter.
Bu Osmanlı tarihinde hiç olmamış bir şey.
This is something that has never happened during the Ottoman period.
Din ve kadın olmak, gelenekler buna engel.
The religion and the tradition are obstacles on this regard.
Ama bu tarihte bir kere olmak üzereydi.
But this once almost happened during the history.
Çünkü tarihte yani tahtın hiç varisi kalmamıştı ve bir kadın neredeyse tahta çıkacaktı.
Because there were no heir to the throne, and a female was almost going to occupy the throne to get.
İşte ben bu kadını tahta çıkarıp iddia ettim ki bir kış hükümdarlık yaptı, kraliçe oldu.
And I made the claim that heir, the female heir, once got to the throne and she became the queen for a single winter.
Bir erkek şunu yazmıştı. Bizim bütün banka şifrelerimiz 1453'tür. Biliyor musun?
Male had written this. All of our bank passwords are 1453. Do you know that?
Neden?
Why?
Çünkü İstanbul'u o zaman fethettik.
Because that's when we got or when we occupied. I apologize. The proper word is giving me Istanbul. When the Ottoman Empire conquered Istanbul.
Böyle bir romanın hayali bile kurulamaz.
Such a novel is not even imaginable.
Üstelik bir kadın yazmış diyordu.
And on top of that, it is written by a female.
Yani erkek yazsa hadi diyecekler bir küçük hata oldu.
If it was written by a man, we would have said it is a small mistake.
Umarım o eleştirmen banka şifresini değiştirmiştir.
I hope just that critic has changed his bank password.
Ve umarım biz kadınlar için de bu ön yargılar ortadan kalkar ve her şey değişir.
And I hope that for us women, these prejudices will go away and everything will change.
Çünkü edebiyatın cinsiyeti yok ve feminizm herkes için iyi şartlar, iyilikler istiyor.
Because literature does not have gender, and feminism is requesting nice things, fun things for everyone.
Yes, thank you. So, but it's very important to change the system, to change this world, to read about all our experience. You said good that literature has no gender, but it has male and female and other experience. So we need to read, I think, about all the experience, all the possible experience, just to get a bigger picture and to realize who we are as humans, and then we can maybe come to some level to better understanding each other and really to find the corner for, not the corner, but the place for everyone. So I will ask you now, is there any questions from the audience for our guests? As you can see, they have really a lot to offer. Yes, please.
Yeah, I thought that.
Do you need mic? Okay.
You want to let us know?
Okay.
Test.
Yeah,
thank you. I really enjoyed the discussion about what, as women, it often comes down to, even when women are talking about it, what we're allowed to write or what we should write or what we feel we can write. And I look forward to a time when we're relaxed enough to write experience as being humans in the world, including the things that aren't spoken about. Because still, even like in the UK, there's an idea that there's equality and that women have the right to write, but still 83% of plays are by men in theatres, which I think, you know, in this... And often, even, you know, in quite radical London theatres, the whole season will be male still. So I just wonder what you feel about gatekeepers. I think it comes down to, before we can relax and write stories in the way we want to, whatever the hell that is, something major needs to change across the world in terms of it's the control. Who's gatekeeping? And that feels like the journalists and the editors and the publishers. And they're not only largely male, but money, status, class comes into that. So, as writers, our responsibility is maybe to write in the way we want to, but how do you feel we can change the bigger picture? Fight the gatekeepers, I guess, and change that.
Yes. Thank you. So it was a great comment. You don't have question particular.
Well, just how do you feel your responsibility to change?
Mine or
how you can, anybody's.
Okay. Does anyone want to answer the question?
It is of course important to beat whole system, not only players. And the whole system, it's really, really difficult. Now we saw change in German politics. I can speak only for German experience. We have now a foreign minister from Green Party, and she's now the most important politician suddenly. And then everybody is, because of her, speaking about change in foreign politics in the world, and there is a new name for it, female foreign policy. And everybody is discussing about it because she shows her emotions. She was in Africa, and then she was with African women there, and they show her how to, I don't know, how to bring water on the head, you know, and she made everything of it. And she's foreign minister of Germany. Never, ever, one male foreign minister made all these things. But she was in a village with these women, and they show her how they make bread and how they have their children, and she, because she's mother and woman, mother of two, and everybody is now speaking about changing paradigm in the policy through this woman. That is great. That is change of system, you know. Then she was of course, in Russia on the beginning of the war, before the war began, and every male politician was, of course, also there. You know, in February, everybody was in Moscow to speak with Lavrov and with Putin. Without results. And she was also there, of course, also without results, but in the discussion with Lavrov, because she is really the fox of foreign policy, and then this young girl from Germany is there. And she gave her on the dinner to drink vodka, like they do with every of these politicians. And she told no, she doesn't drink. She doesn't like vodka. And Lavrov told, oh, that is custom. All guests here, because of course she's a small little woman, and if she drinks so much vodka on the table with those guys, it's really not good for her. And then he told to her, if you are brave, you take this vodka now. And she told to him, I gave birth to 2 children. I don't have to prove my braveness.
Great.
And she was like, every journal in Germany bring it. I think also international journals bring it. She told to Lavrov, I don't have to prove it. I gave birth to 2 children. And that is great. That is changing our system, and we have to support it. It is on all levels. like changing on universities, that we have female professors, like changing in journals. And then, of course, in the writing, we have as a goal for us to take it for us, to take everything what we like, every style, every issue, every form, and so. But we are now on fight, so on the fight, everything is allowed. Yes.
So, basically telling our stories and sharing the awareness and yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. So maybe here and here.
The first one or something? But for me, if I can go, because it perfectly follows what you were talking about, that's like a big question for me. I'm not sure, and I mean all the time I'm asking myself, and I kind of like know the answer, but it would be interesting to hear it from you also. Do we need more female voices or we need more feminist voices? Because being a woman, and that's exactly perfect example that you are giving to us, this German politician or a president of European Commission. She's a woman, but both of them are, that the way how they talk and what they do is not feminist at all. It's highly militarized. It doesn't put a woman, I mean, putting a, like, showing how somebody in another country, it's very problematic example. It's not what I want to see. So, and then we have Mona El-Tahawi, and she is perfectly writing and talking about these foot soldiers of patriarchy. And I'm afraid that this is exactly an example of a foot soldier of patriarchy. This minister, she's not a feminist. The president of European Commission is not a feminist. Even though she's a woman, it doesn't mean if you are a woman that you will give a voice and that you will talk a feminism. And that's what, like, do we need more feminists? Or we will just like divide ourselves men and women?
Yes.
And because, I mean, if I'm a woman, I can be extremely patriarchal. And that's exactly the problem, especially here in the region, that we have many women who are patriarchal.
Why do you think that this green politician is not feminist? She's feminist for all these years. She's not from yesterday in the politics. Now she's minister, but she's of course in the politics. Annalena Baerbock is in politics for 20 years. And she's very feminist.
She's talking about the war.
What is to be feminist?
She's talking about the war. She's very...
Yeah, but there is a war. She's not talking about the war. The war is reality.
She can talk about peace.
She's talking also about peace. But what can you do if you have a war as a reality?
Talk about the peace. I survived the war. I know what we can do. When we go through the war, we should talk about peace. We should push for a peace, and we should push for equality and a feminist approach.
No, I'm really not. I disagree at all. So because we are in reality, and it's real politics, and we have a strong foreign minister, and if the women take only feministic positions that are only female issues or something like that, then we can change nothing. But within the system, to change things, within the system, is to take positions. And there are realistic positions, and we have a real war, and she's, in my opinion, doing very well in this position. That is the idea, to have ministries, to have politicians, to have people in positions. Because if we are always playing on the edge of all things, it's not good. And now she's in the middle of things. And of course she has to react on the real war.
Thank you. Does anyone
I
want to
just
add
remembered
something?
a short example from the US. Actually, they were mentioning there how the army there is being more feminist because they are having more women in the army. And we were like, yeah, but the idea is not to have an army. But in reality, and then as you said, you have it. So there are people who are talking about it, so why there shouldn't be women as well. And perhaps one of the basic requests of feminism is precisely this, to have women, first of all, to have our voices everywhere, what is happening. And then we might start to actually change it. Because if you don't have women politicians, first of all, how can we aim to have, let's say, a prime minister who then can make politics, feminist politics? So sometimes we have to how to say it, kind of agree to disagree with some things, just so that we look forward to something that can come from that. So maybe that's not idealistic, but at the same time, it has to be done.
But for example, we had in Croatia a president, she was a female, but she did a lot of damage to women in Croatia, especially coping with one lady, her name is Željka Markić, and she is a leader of conservative organization in Croatia, and she forbidden, exactly, she put in the constitution, she did a referendum, and now in Croatian constitution is written that marriage is only between women and men. So she is a really leader, she is a female voice, but she's not a feminist. She's a strongly patriarchal voice, and what should we do with that?
Or like what Ana Brnabić is doing in Serbia.
Yes.
Like people would expect that she would understand
Yes.
the LGBT.
And she did much more harm
Yes.
to LGBT population than. So yeah, what to do with that?
I think the question if it's enough to have a female voice or to have a feminist voice is very key question. I myself, when I was thinking about feminist movement in Kosovo and women, I remember I wrote a piece with which I disagree now, because at that time I thought, okay, they were women and they were joining this national liberation movement, and they were there as Albanian, first of all, then as women. They were talking about Albanian issues and liberation, but not about women's issues. So to me, I said, that's not feminist movement, that's just women being there. But later on, and when you talk to women who were actually there, they said, yeah, but that's how we had to do it, otherwise there wouldn't be space for us. So we had to use our Albanian identity, to use the national liberation movement, so that we as women would have a place there, and then as women we would change the narrative. And that is happening now. Today, feminist movement in Kosovo is completely different. It is a feminist movement, but it is because of those women who joined the movement as women, even though they didn't call themselves feminist. And one of them said, I didn't call myself feminist, especially in public, because I didn't want to trigger people, but we called ourselves feminists when we were back in our house with other women. So they knew what they were doing. It was just their strategy to... So sometimes there are...
It's a strategy.
Yeah.